And welcome back to the What the Falk podcast for yet another episode. We have been Euro-focused this past month, but considering Sunderland have appointed a new boss that previously none of us have heard of, it felt only right to rope in someone who might know a little bit about him and give us the lowdown on Regis Le Bris in the shape of Lorient, I think I pronounced that correctly, fan, and French Football Weekly host Kris. How are you, mate? Are you well?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Graham. Thanks for reaching out. Appreciate it. And Sunderland brings back memories. As an Arsenal fan, I remember going to the game. I want to say it was '97. It was Robert Pires's debut, and I believe the quote after the game was, "I've never experienced football of this level." I think Sunderland gave him a rude awakening that particular day. So yeah, many years ago that was.
Was that like Roker Park era by any chance?
I think it was Stadium of Light, to be honest.
Oh,
it was. Yeah, we were. I think you had the Nike kits with what was the sponsorship, the car company you had? Was it
Reg Vardy?
Reg Vardy, yeah, that's it. Yeah. So that's weird what you remember as a football fan, isn't it?
You remember too much. We should probably empty our brains a little bit.
Yes.
But yes, you do. You do remember a lot. Now, we'll get straight to it. We're going to talk tactics, negatives, positives, and all in between as best as we can in 25, 30 minutes. But my first question that I want to ask, obviously, as you said before, you're an Arsenal fan, but you support Lorient in France. You're someone who's watched the Le Bris team for 2 seasons now. What's your initial reaction to the fact he's going to be the manager of Sunderland?
Okay, so not surprised that he moved on from Lorient, not at all. We'll come on to the reasons why that might be in a second, but I think it's quite an exciting appointment, and I'm quite intrigued by it. Something that I didn't realise until I did a little bit of research on something. I had no idea that your squad is the youngest in the Championship currently, and that's what really intrigues me with Le Bris. I should say as well, I hate doing that thing where you go, "Oh, you've got to correct people," but so many people have been asking the correct pronunciation of his name, and it is in fact Regis Le Bris. So There you go. You can show off to all your friends now with that. But yes, I was on the Le Bris train as well, but apparently you pronounce the S. But I have a feeling this might be all right. I know there's a lot of concern whenever somebody is appointed, and I think as well, when you appoint a Ligue 1 manager, there is still this kind of feeling of, oh yeah, but the French league's a farmers league, etc., and so on. So there is always a little bit of concern. But I think from what Sunderland were looking at, they were clearly looking to go down the French model because they were looking at Will Still previously, of course. So I think and I hope you might be pleasantly surprised. And yeah, I'm disappointed to see him go. So that should tell you a fair bit.
I think I'll get into the immediate worry. I normally like to start with the positive and do a bit of a shit sandwich. The positive, the negative, the positive. But let's start with the immediate worry, because I know that's what fans want to know about. First thing I do is I look at who's this guy, and he's coming on the back of relegation. So I think, right, why has he been relegated? So the caveat is he's lost many good players that, some of us know about, and it's apparently hindered him. But what's the actual truth behind the relegation, and how much of a role did he actually play in that?
Yeah, so you have to kind of almost go back all the way to last summer for the start of where this started to go wrong. So for those who don't know, Regis Le Bris is 48 years old. He was at Lorient for just over 11 years, came through the youth system and was extremely successful as a youth coach, if you will. And that was the main reason why they wanted to go through that internal appointment for him, because he was sort of thought of as a guy who could develop the future generation. And that's where he got the head of youth development role with Lorient. Once he got the promotion, the first season ended up finishing 10th. Now, to give you an idea of the size of Lorient, they're a side that if you went to, let's keep it relevant, Championship terms, you'd probably be looking at, even Sheffield Wednesday are too big. Trying to think of a good example, maybe at Preston. So, actually even that might be too big, but we're talking about a side that will be finishing anywhere from mid-table to lower end of the table. So usually, until this season, unfortunately, above the relegation zone, but certainly not pushing for top 10. So to finish where they did on the budget they have, it was not bad. Lorient are a very well-run club, but they do have a president in Loic Ferry who He's very hands-on. They've got a very interesting model in terms of that the best players are sold on for high profit. And I think that's where, as you alluded to, that this sort of relationship with Le Bris sort of started to go on or hit the skids. And last summer, he was heavily linked with jobs of both Leeds and Nice. And he made no secret of the fact that he was very interested in the Nice job. And it seemed to me that off the back of that not happening, there were discussions with Ferry, and it was been made very apparent to Le Bris at that time that players were going to be sold, and he wasn't going to be able to replace them with players of the same level. And that led to some of the transfer dealings, which we might touch on. So although, yes, you're absolutely right. When a manager is relegated, you do look at it and you think, wow, we're bringing in a guy who's essentially taking a team down. This really did start last summer, and it progressed all the way through. He never got a clear run. And in January, when other players were sort of let go and again, less than adequate replacements came in, I think the writing was on the wall even at that point in time. And I think if you ask Le Bris honestly, I think he kind of knew that he wasn't going to be staying on even back in January. And the performances on the pitch, unfortunately, kind of led to that. It's a classic example of manager falls out with chairman and the rest is history. So hopefully if Sunderland give him the backing and they invest in this sort of project youth, then hopefully you'll see a better relationship there, and then that'll allow him to do what he's good at, which is coaching. You
touched on before his history a little bit now. One thing I did look at is because I've seen he was mainly an academy coach for a long time, I think at Rennes, and then spent a long time at Lorient for like a decade or so. And some pretty decent players that he's brought through, but you sort of touched on it a little bit there. But what is his legacy at Lorient? What did he build before he became the manager, and how could that maybe fit into Sunderland's way of thinking? Because as fans, we all want more experience, but like even if we brought in 2 or 3 players over the age of 27, we've still got a very, very young squad, which we need a manager that can deal with that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think you almost have to go back to his time with Rennes, where you look at that. Where did that youth development start? He actually won the Coupe Gambardella, which is the equivalent to sort of like the French Youth Cup, what would be equivalent to the English Youth Cup, I guess, in this country. And that was in 2007, I believe. 2008, I think it was actually. I think it's 2007 that he was with the under-19s. So he had that reputation of being good with youngsters at that point, and that was kind of what Lorient picked up on. He rejected a renewal of the contract with Rennes. It kind of come to a natural conclusion, and he went straight in as head of youth development with Lorient as a touch number 4. So it wasn't like he came in as a side coach almost. He came straight in as head of youth development. And he was also the coach for the under-17 squad at championship national level, which was in 2015. So he's always had this kind of reputation of being a player who can manage youth players and can bring players on and improve them. And I think that's the really big drawing point that I picked up on. There's a couple of names that you might know of that he sort of broke his arm around. The Leeds goalkeeper, Ilan Meslier, you might know, he came through the Lorient Academy. Alexis Claude-Maurice, who won't be too well known for English fans, but he's ended up at Nice as well. And somebody I'm sure you will have heard of, one Matteo Guendouzi, who divides opinions amongst various football fans. But, he was good enough to attract the interest of Arsenal and is now at Lazio. So, and also a very temperamental character to manage, which Le Bris sort of got hold of. So those sort of players were encouraged. Enzo Lefebvre is another one to look at because he moved on to Rennes. Personally, I think he could have even made the step higher. So I really think that that is his big draw. It's being able to work with young players and develop them as young footballers and give them the license. It's not to say he can't work with established sort of, longer in the tooth players. I must confess, I haven't seen Sunderland's sort of most recent squad list, but I would imagine you've still got a few experienced players there. But he allows young players to thrive, and he gives them wings, if you will. He lets them express themselves. He's not somebody he doesn't suffer fools gladly. He's not afraid to drop players. But he is definitely a coach that if he sticks somebody in and he thinks that they're good enough, he'll give them that time to develop, and he'll give them that time to express themselves on the pitch. And that's what I think the model is that Sunderland are looking to go with for appointing him.
You searched before on Will Still, and like to be honest, it's a name that like I heard for the past 6 months continuously, and every Sunderland fan has, because it seemed in many ways that he was the choice until, for whatever reason he's gone to loan and not come to Sunderland. There's been a bit of debate in the Sunderland fan base so far that a lot of people would have been really happy with Will Still, and there's some people that are not 100% certain on Le Bris. And one of those arguments is that, well, he finished above him, not last season, obviously, but the season before. I think it was 10th that Lorient finished, and then 11th where Reims finished. Honest opinion, as someone who watches French football a lot more, and a lot is kind of doing a lot of heavy lifting here as a word than myself. Who is the better manager? Who would have been realistically the better appointment?
Cool. You throw me a hand grenade there.
Did that on purpose.
Do you know what? It's a really difficult one to say. I think they're very different types of managers. Will Still came through. He's obviously he's an Englishman abroad, if you will. He's very much the hipster's choice because of what he went down the line. For those who don't know the story, he was playing Championship manager. He got scouted by a Belgian club. Him and his brother went over there, and they ended up getting jobs and ended up taking over as managers, and the rest is history. So he's very much like the 14-year-old's dream, sat in the bedroom playing a computer game, and all of a sudden you're managing. Still is a very, he's very, he believes in stats. He believes in scouting. He's a very numbers-driven manager. The difference with Le Bris is Le Bris is more of a hands-on sort of football. He's more of an on-the-pitch coach, I think, personally. That's not to say Will Still isn't a great coach, because I think he is, and I think he'll do really well with his new club. But I think Le Bris is a different type of manager, and I think maybe part of the reason that Will Still didn't go to Sunderland, possibly anyway, is he's the sort of guy that, because he's only really managed abroad, I think that he will look at this and think, where's my reputation? Like, how can I further my reputation? And I think a step from a club like Rouse, who really weren't expected to do very much other than survive, to then go to a team like Lens, who, yes, they made the Champions League, but they're very much in transition. He can stamp his authority on it. There's no real risk to his reputation, because if it goes well, brilliant, he can move on again. I think what Le Bris has done is taken a real step outside the box here, and he's going to be giving up. He's always managed in France, like you said, through Rennes and Lorient. He's taking a real step outside of his comfort zone, and I think, if anything, that sort of suggests his character is a little bit more robust potentially. He's not afraid to fail. That's not to say he will, but I think I think there was, like you said, it was what, 6 months he was linked with a job.
It felt like 6 years, to be honest.
It did, didn't it? And I believe from what we had French-wise, I think he had at least 3 rounds of talks with Sunderland. So it's clearly a lot was going on there. So that to me, if I'm a Sunderland fan, I'm looking at it from my club's perspective. I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute, we're a big club here. You are a big club. Massive support. That should have been a club that Will Still should have jumped at the chance for, and I think that's exactly why Le Bris has gone for it. It's a really big club and an opportunity to take what has been a nightmare under the former Rangers boss. That really didn't go well, did it?
No.
I think he's got a real opportunity to work with some players there. So I haven't really answered the question, but what I will say is that they're very different types, and I kind of admire Le Bris for stepping up and taking this opportunity, where he clearly wasn't that convinced. Otherwise, he'd have just signed as soon as the opportunity came up.
I actually fully agree with it. You've answered it for me, because that was my thoughts.
That's good enough for me.
I just wanted clarification. I touched on the relegation, and I touched on some of the things that might pop out straight away, which is not how we'd normally do it, if I'm honest. But there is a real positive. We've talked about him finishing 10th the season before last, when he had, his team before was kind of ripped apart a little bit. But I think what some Sunderland fans won't know, obviously you will, is that I think he had you before the World Cup break in 5th at one point, which is outstanding, really. Why did that sort of first season go so well? We've seen a couple of videos from that season, and the football looks great. It looks free-flowing and fast. But why did his first season go so well? Because that's a really impressive debut season, no matter how much experience you've got in academies.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think it was sort of a case that he was, because he was this sort of youth coach, it was a breath of fresh air. Lorient had gone through a couple of managers where it was a little bit sticky. Probably Governet was the last good coach they had, and it was just it almost just felt like a breath of fresh air. And because it was like, to use the English expression, one of our own, it was that opportunity of somebody coming through who had done really good things with younger players. And because Lorient's squad was a fairly young squad at that time as well, and there was a lot of exciting players, two of which were indeed moved on in Dango Ouattara and Terra Moffi. And it was that, as you exactly said, he played fast-flowing football. He attacked teams. I distinctly remember the PSG game where he really went after him. And if you look at Ligue 1 sides, yeah, there's a few teams that will give PSG a game, but on the whole, it's PSG's title when they want it every season. And very few teams attack PSG because they just look at it and think, oh God, well, we're just going to get beaten here. Lorient really made that effort, especially at the Moustoir and in the home games. And they went after big teams and they got some really good results. And I think that kind of, it's a little bit like when a team just starts the season well and that momentum carries on. But the good thing that I thought with Le Bris is he was able to change tactics a little bit. Although the formation largely stayed the same, which we might touch on in a minute, he was able to move players in and out. He was able to give sort of different styles of play, different patterns of play, all based around attacking football, but with that ability to change tactics at any given game. And I just think that's almost what disappoints me the most, because that first season was so good. And as you say, they were pushing for Europe at one point, and it was like, how well can this go? And I think in reality, it probably had that little bit of a, I guess we call like the Brighton thing, where it's like you have one really good season and then naturally it starts to fall away towards the back end. And yeah, I think that when it was very clear that he was doing his job brilliantly by elevating the value of these players, and he was elevating the profile of these players that were ultimately going to be sold. I think any manager at that point, after that's happened and you've had a really good season, and then when you think, right, we've had a great season, we started the season brilliantly, we ended the season well, we finished in a comfortable position in the league, in 10th, let's kick on now. And your chairman says, by the way, he's gone, and we're replacing him with these players. I mean, any manager worth his salt's going to be a bit like, well, give me something here. I can't work miracles. So I think that you say the attacking style and that direct play and almost that ability to surprise opponents was what got Lorient that excellent season and catapulted him into that coach where the likes of Nice and Leeds were looking at him.
Talking of his formation and style and stuff like that, that's always something that's massively important. And I think you either get a coach that comes in that's really flexible, or a coach that is like kind of entrenched in that formation. But probably formation, as I think many former footballers will sometimes say, it doesn't really matter. It's all about the style and kind of knowing your job. But what sort of formation does he use? A, and B, what sort of style can we expect? Because when I've read about him, I've read lots of contrasts and things. I've read super direct, very much like the anti-Pep. But then I've seen some highlights which have been really sort of pro-fluid football. So I'm kind of unsure what to expect. Hopefully you can fill me in and fill us in on that a little more.
Yeah, so I guess you kind of almost have to caveat the fact that when the season started to go off a cliff, this was sort of the back end of this season when things really started to go rough, he definitely did tinker with the system quite a lot. So what was traditionally, he was always playing the 4-2-3-1. The thing that sort of slightly, it's hard to gauge, because when the 4-2-3-1 worked for him, it worked really well because he always had that solid base of two central defenders, attacking fullbacks, which everyone likes, of course. And he had the benefit of, he would always play like Laurent Avogel, for example, the captain of Lorient was a staple under Le Bris. So it was always like his chief in general. He would be the sort of anchoring midfielder. Then he'd have another player who would often be a younger player who would sit alongside him in that holding midfield with the license to carry the ball. And then essentially you had a flexible front three behind a striker. So when you had like a Terra Moffi, for example, when he was there, that worked brilliantly because you could pick any three players behind him who could just float. When things started to go really wrong in the season and the results started to really struggle, you were seeing a lot of five at the back. You were seeing a lot of let's compact the midfield. Let's essentially try not to get beaten. And some people called it a three back. it wasn't. It was a five back. Like it just was. You had three out and out central defenders, mainly Laporte, Talby, and Ajay, and then he was playing. I mean, at one point, Benjamin Mendy was playing left full back. Katsaris, who was signed as a midfielder, was playing as right back. He's a right winger. So I think it's safe to say that he knows how to box in a game, if you will. And that might prove quite useful for the Championship, because there are certain games where you are going to play. You just look at the teams that have come down, but Leeds, we mentioned they're still in the Championship for certain teams like that. You can't just go balls to the wall, if you will, in those sort of fixtures. But generally, he is a forward-thinking manager. He is an attacking manager, and I wonder if he might actually refresh that 4-2-3-1 a bit, and I think he might go with more of a 4-3-3 option, which he started to play with that last summer a little bit, just because the 4-2-3-1 is quite outdated. Ask any England fans about that at the moment. So, I have a suspicion that when he first comes in, he will start off with a strong base, and he'll try and sort of base it around two decent centre halves, but he will push those fullbacks on. He'll definitely like wingers. I completely forgot you've still got Adil Ashish, who was at Lorient before.
Yeah.
I think he'll quite like him, purely because he was one of the players that he wanted signed. He never really got a good look in at Lorient, but I think he'll quite enjoy using him. So, yeah, I would expect that he will initially stick to that 4-2-3-1, but he'll be more than happy to adapt it as the season goes on. And I think, look out for those attacking fullbacks and look out for those wingers, because that's the staple that he goes for, and a mobile centre forward. If you've got one of those, he will definitely look to utilise that.
Hilariously, we don't have a centre forward at the moment, not a functioning one anyway, but I'm hopeful that will change come August, so fingers crossed. I'm basing this on one tweet that I saw, literally one tweet. I saw one fan commented and then replied to a Sunderland fan that his football was all right. He thinks he'll do well, but that he can be quite, and it was broken English to be fair, he can be quite a difficult man. What sort of man is he?
Yeah, I don't think, I think the one word I would say is he definitely this season has shown he can be quite stubborn. And it's very hard to know where you sit in football with a stubborn manager, because you sometimes you kind of respect managers who just say, no, we're playing this way. It's the Mike Bassett approach. We're playing 4-4-2. And I kind of like that about Le Bris, because he sticks to his principles. Will Still was very similar. But the problem with that is that if you continue to play that way, you end up in sort of like it's happened to De Zerbi, for example. You get a reputation for playing this way, and then when you get battered several times, suddenly people start going, yeah, but can you do anything else? So I think his stubbornness is something that, who'd have thought a Frenchman being stubborn? But that is maybe something that he does need to adapt slightly. And we did see it last season a lot. Mentioned it just there. His refusal to change formation. It was, we're going to play 4-2-3-1. And then it was only really when, as I said, the results were so bad, it was like, right, okay, we'll play 5 at the back, or we'll play 3 with 2 fullbacks. So I do think that he will stick to his principles. But again, coming off the back of what you guys have had to endure, I don't think that'll be a bad thing, having a manager who actually says, no, I'm going to try and get some football back in this team, and actually play the way I want to play. And again, when you're working with younger players, or if you've had success as a youth coach, you don't get a good reputation as a good manager if you fall out with players. You don't manage Matteo Guendouzi if you fall out with players easily, because he'd fall out with himself in a quiet room. So, he's, as I said before, I wouldn't class him as a disciplinarian, but he isn't the sort of manager that will just continually sort of give player chance after chance after chance. If it doesn't work, he will change it. But I do think he'll stick to his principles in the way he plays. And I think he'll stick by players as well. I don't think he's the sort of manager that will just go, oh God, we've lost away at Norwich 3-1, so I'm going to tear it all up and start again next week. I don't feel like that's going to be the sort of manager he is. And it remains to be seen whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because if you are sort of mid-table come Christmas, that's when the stubbornness might be an issue, because he might not want to change it. And again, new country, new style, new fans, it can go one of two ways. But that would be my only concern I don't see him as a manager who's going to be. He's not a Neil Warnock. He's not a Mick McCarthy. He's not going to be screaming at players and sort of throwing things up against the wall. And I think he'll actually embrace the culture a little bit as well. I think he'll be if the fans get behind him. He really united the Lorient fan base, which I really liked. Really brought that fan base together, particularly for a small club. And I think if he can, as I said before, that catchment area of Sunderland, you get it right at a club like that. I mean, you would know better than I would, but I would imagine you'll be paraded through the streets if you get it right. Equally, you'll be nailed to the wall if you don't. So
I think if you win like 5 games in a row, you'd probably get knighted at the minute. To be honest, it's been a pretty dire, apathetic 6 months. But I got one thing that really confuses me, and you'll not be able to answer this, but he looks like a combination of Gus Poyet and Chris Coleman in one, which is good and bad. And a really terrifying thing because Gus Poyet, like a lot, Chris Coleman, also like not a very good manager for us. So fingers crossed he's more on the Poyet style. Now, in terms of like the last 2 questions I've got, one of the questions, I don't even know if it's worth asking, to be honest, because I don't know how much he'll be dealing with it. I don't think a lot of clubs have their managers signing players these days. They might have a say in it, but it's all done by a director of football or, general manager, whatever it may be these days. But we sign a lot of younger players. There's kind of whispers that might change a little bit. And the fact we've signed a 34-year-old backup goalkeeper indicates that maybe, just maybe, we might be going for a little bit of experience in the dressing room. But obviously, another way football works, he won't have made all the signings himself. But what is his success rate with new signings? Has he managed to integrate new players quite well? Has he actually signed any, made any recommendations? What's his success rate like with new signings?
Yeah, so it is, I'm not going to lie, it is a difficult question to answer purely because Lorient's business model is very much, I'd say, the president and the transfer committee, we've all heard of those before, tend to be involved in the transfers. And Lorient they've got a quite heavy English influence as well as a couple of English directors there. And they very much are a club of, we buy them cheap, we sell them high. Like Terry Murphy went for 22 million euros, I think it was. And Enzo Lefebvre went for 20. Even Ibrahima Kone, who really had a good couple of months, that was it. He went for 7 odd million euros. So with Le Bris, I think what I would say is I would imagine he would have got some assurances based on what's happened at Lorient. I would imagine he would have been given some assurances that he has some input into the transfers, because that was very much where the fractures started with Lorient. Once he fell out with Ferry and once he was told, look, players are going to go. The biggest example of it for me was Romain Fevre, who's plays for Bournemouth. So he was signed on loan from Lyon and was absolutely pivotal to the way that Le Bris was playing in that successful period at the start of the season when things were going well. And he was playing in that number 10, pulling all the strings. And then in January, Bournemouth had this link up with Lorient, and it was determined he's going back to Bournemouth. There was no consultation with Le Bris at all. So it's like the one player you're basing your whole attacking sort of ethos around is going back to his now new parent club. So I would have thought he would have brought something like that up and said, look, I appreciate that, yes, you can bring in players, but he will have some sort of input, I would imagine. As for his transfer strategy, the reason it's hard to answer is it's hard to know how many of those players he actually signed. Fevre was one that he identified, but if you look at Lorient's transfers, it is generally they're players that not many people have heard of that come in and then they're sold on for good money. So I don't know if you can really base it or base any sort of structure around how he signs players, but I really hope that he's given, or that we get to see what kind of player he goes for. I have a suspicion, being French, and given the fact the Ligue 1 market is fairly good value, I think you probably will see a couple of players come in from France. It would make sense. It's logical. But I was just looking at Sunderland's squad now.
Fair few in there already, isn't there? Yeah.
There's a few there already, yeah. And I think also there's a couple of players there that he might quite like working with. I know that Joe Bellingham gets some hype because of who his brother is, but the style of player that he is, I think he'll quite enjoy working with him. Timothy Pembele is a former PSG player. He's an exact Le Bris type of fullback. Athletic, gets up and down. Needs a bit of work in the final third. I'm not going to lie, but he's an all action type of defender. Patson, the goalkeeper's quite young, if I'm not mistaken, as well.
Yeah, he's still 22, but that makes him very experienced in Sunderland's team. So
yeah, high experience at 22, which is scary. And have you still got the boy from Leeds, Jack Clark? Is it?
At the moment, yes, but that could change at any moment because I think talking about buying them low and selling them high, Jack Clark might be one that fits that remit. We hope not, but I mean, fingers crossed, he's our best player. So.
That would be a shame if he moved on because, again, he's the sort of player that I think Le Bris would love to work with. Pretty dynamic. He's quick. I think he can play both wings as well as sort of in that forward role. He'd be an ideal type of player to work around. So, I can see that. And transfers are going to be a really interesting thing. And you probably know far better than I do how Sunderland do things nowadays with the manager. I'll hold my hands up. The documentary on Netflix was the only thing I ever saw about the inner workings of Sunderland. So I don't know if that's changed a lot since then, but it did seem a little bit chaotic back then. So hopefully it's a bit more structured now.
That's up for debate. But that is definitely another podcast for another day. I've got one more for you. I'm going to put you totally on the spot. Sometimes I quite like asking this question. I haven't done it for a couple of years. If you were to describe Regis Le Bris in 3 words, what would they be?
Oh, that's a good one. Ambitious, driven, and see, I'm tempted to go with stubborn just because I can cover myself with a slight negative. Yeah, I mean, we'll have stubborn, but we won't necessarily say it's a good or bad thing. Principled, maybe that's a better word. Principled, believes in his own methods, believes in his own ways. And I don't know if he's bringing in his own coaches or not, but that would be quite interesting to see.
I think so. I think there's a few. I think Goethe is the one that's nailed on, and there's another 2 they are speaking to, I believe.
Interesting. The one that I immediately looked at and thought, I wonder if he could potentially bring in either as an assistant or potentially as a coach. You might remember, I think he did play for someone, didn't he? Jeremy Aliadier.
I played for Middlesbrough.
Of course he did. Yeah, yes. Northeast. That's sacrilege. I can't say that, can I? But he's a guy. He's been doing his coaching badges with Arsenal, and is quite interested in coaching. And he's a Lorient hero. And I wonder if Le Bris might have a look at that because I know he was very keen to take Laurent Koscielny across, but he's essentially taken the youth development role that Le Bris had. He's stepped up at Lorient to a higher role now, so he's going to stay. But yeah, I do wonder if he might bring in someone like an Aliadier, so basically somebody who knows the English game, but has also got maybe the links to people who he would have worked with before, and he would have known Aliadier as a player back then, even though he wasn't manager. So I wonder if he might try and go with somebody. And I think if you're a foreign coach coming into your first job overseas, you kind of need somebody who's able to tell you, even if they're not necessarily, directly Sunderland, but someone who knows the club, and maybe even a former pro. What's Kevin Ball up to these days? Someone like that, somebody with a bit of a.
That's a good question. That is a good question as well.
I must confess, actually, I don't know how good his English is because I've only ever seen him answer questions in French. But I assume when he's announced on July the 1st, whenever that will be, I guess we'll get a good gauge on his level of English. But I think he will be. I think he'll be a guy that will start to lean on experience of those around. And as you know, the Championship takes no prisoners. I live in Plymouth, and speaking to Argyle fans around me, I can tell you it's a tough old league, isn't it, to stay in? So, it'd be very interesting to see what he can do.
It's the right term of phrase, I think. Kris, before I let you go, obviously you've got a really good and successful podcast. If people want to kind of delve into the world of French football, which, to be honest, we probably all do this week, where can we find it, and where's the best place to listen to it?
Yeah, so I'm the host, if you will. I say host, co-host. We'll call it co-host. I want to give my other colleagues some credit there. But French Football Weekly is our podcast. You can find us at French FT Weekly on X. We have to call it these days, don't we? We can't call it Twitter anymore. But yeah, we do a weekly podcast. We're in the midst of the Euros at the moment, so we're recording after the France games, myself, Jeremy, and Phil. So yeah, you can check us out there. We don't do the website stuff anymore. We've just gone to the podcast medium now. But yeah, if you want to learn a bit more about French football, then feel free to tune in. And I really hope it works out. I will be keeping a close eye on Le Bris, and yeah, it's always good to see ex-Lorient managers or players do well elsewhere. So fingers crossed.
This is an audio medium, so no one will have seen that. But when you said, I really hope it goes well, my hands went into like a praying motion and I'm atheist. So that says an awful lot about how I feel about it, I guess. But Kris, thanks so much for joining. Obviously, we know nothing about him, so that's fantastic info, and hopefully it's been positive.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'll just put in the disclaimer, if you're relegated by March, then it wasn't me. It was my AI double that said all this. But no, I really hope it works out well. I wish you well. And it would be nice to see Sunderland back in the Premier League for too long. So fingers crossed it goes well, and keep an eye on that French market. If you do sign any French players, then feel free to give me a nudge.
Thank you very much.
Didn't realise, but picked up Bradley Dack.
Oh, he's gone. He's been released.
Oh, has he been released? Oh,
he's dead to us now.
Is he dead? Is he dead?